Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is well. Wanted to pop on quickly just to introduce this conversation that I had with Scott Mannion of the Greenwood YouTube channel. Scott is a former film director, award-winning film director. Now he's turned to his passion, and it's exploring the roots and the stories, the narratives, the sagas of English civilization. And his channel is very interesting. He does a lot of esoteric kind of readings and explications of different authors and just generally in English civilization, but more as well. We talked about a lot of great things, and this is going to be released on his channel as well. So we started the conversation on the profound effects of technology and globalism as it relates to people, cultures, and the nuclear family. We talked about the roots of alienation as it relates to people's sense of place and space geographically, their sense of connection and communion. We talked about the U.S. and warring hyperagencies. We talked about propaganda and its role in the war in heaven. Talked about spiritual warfare being fought through human beings, egregores, and everything in between. I found it fascinating, and I hope you do as well. So without further ado, here's my appearance on the Greenwood YouTube channel. Thank you.
Today we're talking with the excellent James Courtides, and it's a great conversation I really enjoyed. He's an emerging philosopher and orthodox thinker on YouTube, and there's a link to his channel in the description as well.
Yeah, it happens all the time, and it's always after the fact. Like, I should have recorded that earlier.
Yeah, shit!
Because once that record button, it like turns the gaze of the other on, and all of a sudden it's like, what happens there? It's so weird. There's nobody else here but you and I, right? Or even making a video just into your camera in your room. There's something about the awareness that there's an observer there, the other, or it could be curious. You know, is it fear of judgment? Is it fear of being seen? Fear of looking stupid? You know, it's interesting.
Maybe it's even in Heideggerian sense, an extended cognition. Maybe there is just a recognition of this. Because it's larger than you. The openness is larger than you. It goes into your house. It goes into your room, and there's something about it that knows. Though I understand exactly what you're saying. Is it turns on? Yeah. And you doesn't matter how much you say it to yourself with your modern will, your modernist subject will, and say, "Oh no, I'm just in the room." But no, it knows. It's almost like it knows into the future. It knows it's a projection, isn't it? But it's not. It's not a projection of. It's not a projection of your will. You're not saying it. It just knows.
Yeah. I like the notion of the clearing there, right? Because the clearing expands from your local environment, your home, to through the internet, right? You know, to the kind of the globe in a sense. And it seems like it's a neurosis about judging yourself from the future. I like that, right? Because I don't like listening to myself or listening to old videos, and I don't know why, and I hear a lot of people say that. It's like you're your biggest critic, right? So it's like, you're definitely projecting this feedback loop that it's just an interesting artifact of being human. It's kind of weird. It's weird to be a human, isn't it?
It's weird to be the openness. It's weird to be the openness.
Yeah, it's a strange place we're in, especially now.
Yes, especially with it extending far beyond you, as it pulls you out of the village. I even notice it. Like, a lot of my work is trying to reground, try to see that you can still kind of see the patterns or build a village in a way. Even if you're disconnected, you can still build an archipelago, an internet archipelago or a village. It is there. Like, you've got your local club and you've got these things. If you can just get people back into it or look for it in anthropology, sort of looking at anthropology, hang on, you can build that old structure into things. You can build that, going. If you create the habitual world, it exists, and you enter everyone else's being, because you get separated from it. But you can re-participate consciously the more you understand it, and go, okay, I'm going to go and build. I'm going to walk into these people's world by going to the pub and walking past the pub. I'm going to walk. I'm not going to take my car. I'm going to walk. I'm going to get off at the bus stop early and walk through whatever it is, a suburb. You can probably a bar. There's probably a high street or something. I don't know where you live. There's probably something that has the local community. There still is that community element of it, but most of us go, oh, we've got this nuclear family idea, which I don't really like. You know, everyone's always promoting this idea of the nuclear family. Well, hang on.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just the unit, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We lost the village. That's what we've walked away from. And we've become... Because people rely on that as the traditional thing. But it really isn't. The thing that really bound us together is that wider spirit, that, you know, that village, and then outward even to the country, the language. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing to bring up, the nuclear family, right? I think we've been stripped down to the most fundamental unit of collective organization, which is the family, right? We were previously more embedded in a landscape of meaning, the village, or even a nation, right? And then, you know, God, when people could actually believe in God and that meant something, and their life was ordered and made better by this understanding. But now, you know, belief in God has become, you know, ridiculed now for old, you know, folk, superstitious people. And the belief in a nation now is fascist and nationalist. We can't do that anymore. And towns are all just repeating they're the same thing. Strip mall, at least here where I'm at, strip mall, just no identity, right? So then you have the family unit, which is like the cell. It's like the last piece that you have of some sense of meaningful organization to surround yourself around. And we see that there's an attack on the nuclear family now. You know, there's an attack on the nuclear family. And this kind of came to me today when I was thinking through this video, right? It's attacking the nuclear family is it's like splitting the nuclear atom, right? The energy that you're going to release, right? You've already extricated us from all of these higher orders of organization and meaning making. Now you're going to try to do it at the familial level. Why is that happening? You know, and I don't know where you hail from, but I'm here in Florida, right, in the United States, and my family, for, you know, time immemorial, was from Greece. My parents moved here when my mom was pregnant. Yeah, so that, but I've never.
Well, you're American, but go on.
Well,
sorry.
no, I mean I'm Greek American, right? My fondest memories by far of childhood, even currently, is going back to Greece, to the village, and being with friends and grandparents there. My most cherished memories, right? And you know, and it's weird to think why we feel so uprooted and alienated. At least here in the United States, this isn't a good example, right? My ancestors have always been embedded within the context of their family and their lineage, right? No matter if they're going through persecution from the Turks or whatever it may be, right? We were from a place and a time with a structure and a past that was there to support this. It was a ground that we could at least we could sit on to deal with our problems of day to day. All of a sudden, my parents, you know, they had to, you know, people moved from Greece to the United States. They both didn't know the language, came here, started restaurants in the restaurant business, full cliche, right? And all of a sudden, we're here, right? And we don't have that, at least that physical tie to any location. And the tie to the ancestry has been relegated to like 23andMe, you know. So I try to get stories from my grandma and pictures and just an understanding of where we came from. But I think a lot of part of the alienation at the heart of human subjectivity right now is from this uprootedness that is you know, a result of globalization. And the answer, I think you hit on it, right, is about building new networks, building an arc, right, to get us through this this period. We're in a liminal period. We're in between two worlds, two times, if anything.
And I think with that arc idea, because I spoke to Jonathan about this, it's more than just that there's room in the arc for other things other than animals. And those other things are hyperagencies. And one of them is the hyperagency of Greece, the hyperagency of England, and which I call the King Spirit, the hyperagency of this Geist, which has been denied. But there's room in there, as we know, that if you look at an English village, you can see on the outside of the village is the Green Man. So the Geist of it goes all the way up to the church, and even inside, at least in England anyway. So that is part of the arc. It's not just, you know, I think we need that. We yearn for our particularity. It's not just, I'm Christian, but we also yearn for the particular. Well, we're this people. Because Christianity is universal. We're this people. This is what we are. You're that. We're this. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's sort of plural. It's a pluralistic sort of thing. And it's like that's that species of openness. That's that species. and that's a good thing. And so I think that arc and building those arcs for those things are good, because it's part of our being. And as you mentioned, it's in the ancestry, right? As Heidegger talks about, that's in, even if it's not explicit, that's in the historicity. That's there in your having been. That's still there, even if you don't know even if you're unaware of the ancestor. I'm not talking about genetics. I'm talking about just in the openness, let's say. Even if you're unaware of it, it's influencing your possibilities, especially if you ground yourself authentically. It helps you more if you can understand it and look into it and then ground it, as you probably did when you went to Greece. Is that probably a lot of things for you solidified, just the way you are, the way you act, because I read this, this is metaphysical, but I read Heidegger's sojourns to Greece, and that grounded all his entire metaphysical theories. He talks about it specifically. That he went to Delos, he went to these different places, and it became clear how the contrast of everything gelled with metaphysics. That's how that god emerged in terms of, okay, here's the temple of Poseidon. We can see why that god has this attributes because of the scale of things, that the actual earth formed the world that is the openness, or at least how he sees it as that. And so the actual world, or the earth, actually is part of our being as well in that way. And so that would still be in you from your descent, from the temple. It forms your particularity for your, and the closer you investigate it, the more and more I look into it, the more that's true to me. And I do think, I like what you said about America. Yes, I think that's a big problem with, and in Australia and New Zealand as well, and Canada, is this tendency to unground things. And it's the same everywhere, though. It's happening in Europe too. But especially when it's something like America, because you're also American, which means you're also English, because that's the common culture. As Anton Scalia said, he's like, hey, I'm Italian. I'm the Supreme Court Justice, right? I'm as American as the next guy. And then he says, I went to Europe. And he said, I went to Europe and I studied in Switzerland, and they kept saying, these Anglo-Saxon culture. And I was saying, well, we're America, we're not that. And then he went to England and said, hang on a minute. And he said, I felt at home. And this is an Italian American, right? Which I don't like the double-barreled thing anyway. But he goes there. So what does that mean? It's sort of like you going to Greece. Perhaps if you went to England, you'd even feel the same thing. Right? Because you are that too. And so that's part of the work I do as well, is to, okay, if we're looking into this folk tradition, it should ground all, it does, in fact, too. It should ground, it has an effect on our current behaviors, and it grounds them when you analyze them deeply enough to see their procedural information, their procedural knowledge that's in them, with our current behaviors. But even the locations too, man. There's something there that's in your current being that's connected to that. And like you were talking about with modernism, some of that it's a lot of that, and the Eastern monks have talked about this too when they saw Westerners, is that a lot of that is kind of probably mental illness. Even just our modernistic behavior that we think isn't mental illness may kind of be mental illness. The obsession with competitive, individualistic, the one will, right? This idea of because that is in a way kind of Cartesian, this especially even talking about the nation in terms of a will, because that's individual, right? When it is more of a wider thing, it's about the possibilities that unfold. It is a being, but it's not. That's why Rousseau was such an idiot. Well, not an idiot. He was a smart guy. But anyway, I explored a lot of things there.
Well, let's double click on Rousseau a bit, right? Because he meant well, let's say.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the whole idea there, I think the things that we are seeing manifest in our world today are fundamentally rooted in Rousseau and this idea that man is free, everywhere. Man is free, but is everywhere in chains. The idea is that we're born free, and it's the society structure hierarchy that binds us in chains, right? And that's why it's those that are looking to bring forth the revolution again are saying they don't have a positive vision for what can manifest. They say that we'll build the plane as we break it down, right? Because the oppressive structure is so ingrained into the system that we just need to destroy it at all costs. And at the bottom of that system is where we'll find out how we build the new, in a sense. And it's a pernicious idea that I think has taken root. And with regards to the particularity that you were talking about, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. But it's a double-edged sword, and it's a fraught landscape because we have the same. I think that being from a place is absolutely is a meaningful thing. You have people that from a mountainous region, their personality, their culture is a little different. If people are, from a seafaring people, they have a different mentality, right? You can see how the geology, affects the, the next strata up, right? It's kind of logical too. It makes sense, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, then from the folks on the hyper left, the woke folks that say that, the colonial powers, the European powers that came to the US, they uprooted the people that were here, right? So those people that had a connection to the ground, that had a connection to nature, that had a connection that went who knows how far back, right, have been uprooted and have been dispersed. And there's been a sort of invasion of another type of people from elsewhere, in a sense, right? That's not wrong, right? I mean, that's not like that happens, but that happens all the time, right? So, it's interesting to, I think like Pajot talks about, or when we talk about, you can't get rid of religion, right? If you try to get rid of it explicitly, it comes back in all of these weird, monstrous ways. I think it's the same thing with what we're talking about in terms of identity, particularity, and place, right? These are fundamental structures of being that we inhabit. And if we get rid of that through globalization or whatever global techno utopia we're trying to that's trying to emerge here, you're always going to come back to this idea that we are a people rooted in a place and a time, right? And that's, I think, we're in a fraught territory here. So what do we do? We're here, right? We're mixed up. Globalization has happened. There's no, taking the pee out of the ocean at this point, right? So we're here. We're mixed with each other. America's an experiment where we're trying to figure out how to live amongst multiple hyperagencies, right? So if you have there's Greeks here, there's English here, Italians, whatever, what have you, right? So Dugin takes the idea of Dasein, of Heidegger's idea of Dasein, and he ties it to a civilization, and as such, so he calls it the logos of a civilization, or the Dasein of a civilization, right? So there's a hyper agent that's tied to each civilization, right? Now we find ourselves, in terms of globalism, mixed up in different areas. Either we're living integrated more with each other, or we're more ghettoized. But there's this clash of the logi of civilizations. The way I like to think of it, it's the clash of the titans, right? It's the clash of the gods that is manifesting itself once again, is reemerging. Because if there's a hyper agent tied to a people with a history and a place, and now that all of these hyper agents are moving together, let's say in America, and that's the melting pot. But what we're experiencing is the war of the gods. It's spiritual warfare that's fought through people, and it gets tricky. It gets tricky.
I think that, yeah, I know what you mean. I think that also with these hyper agencies, I find a lot of the traditional ones, the ones that are old, sort of. The way I see it with the English one is that it's been resting dormant and waiting, because it's been ignored since, a lot of that has been ignored since scientism. Yet it's still there, and it's potent because it's in care, it's in the value hierarchy, it's in us, it's in you. So it's almost like the tentacles of, like an underground tunnel network that's just waiting and hasn't been brought back online. Also, we didn't have I think we did have the language to talk about this in, the church fathers and such. They knew what daemons were. Not, in the 1600s, it was John Dee knew what these things were. But since then, it's become this, they don't exist. But so I do think they influence us. I think the positive ones that are powerful and great for us, under Christ, for need to be brought back on, not brought back online, because they're much more powerful than you. Because I don't mean it in the sense of, it's more complicated than just a principality. It's not simply principality. When you say city, it's, well, yes, we all know what a city is. Yes, it has its own Geist, but this older stuff, 1,000 years old, is based on our greatest heroes: Kingsbury, Robin Hood, this stuff, right? King Arthur. These are different. They're more mythological gods in a way, and they're there. Like I said, they're the underground networks there, so they're almost like potential energy. It's like an infolded reserve. Like I've been doing a lot of philosophizing about this. Is that okay? Well, that's what an implicit spirit is, isn't it? It's infolded waiting. It's okay. Can that influence us? How much is that influencing us? Just because we don't have a word for it. The devil can still, this is not the devil at all, because it's under Christ, but the devil can still influence you without you knowing his name, can't he? So, okay, there is some effect there, but its potential is great. Now, as to what you were saying, yes, we're all split up. My first reply, which might sound a bit spicy, which is us going to these other nations, is, well, look, we had wars, they lost. It's as simple as that. In France, England lost the territory in France, and that's now France, and they are all French. America, I'm sorry, those Indian nations lost the war. So it's only our Christian sympathy that gets us to pay the money or whatever that is. So I know this is spicy, but that's the truth. Lost a war. And that's what happens in Europe, and that's now France. So if we were more chat about this, if this was back in Rome, whatever, it'd be like, no, you're Roman now. You're English now. So, but the truth of it is, though, like when I look at America, my view is that everyone, if I went to a place, the melting pot I don't buy. I just think that the founding fathers, all that, these were Englishmen. I think that that's what people should be. The reason why it's confusing is because it was as necessary to propagandize and say, we're not this, we're American, okay, because we fought a war against the British. But the truth of the matter is, what's more interesting about the founding fathers is who they were, rather than the propositions that are sort of French and revolutionary and all that. It's their patterns of action are English, and so that's fundamentally, if you want to keep the laws and the place of what it is and what you love, then you need to understand the procedures that make someone who those founding fathers were. Because you're also American. You're born in America, I assume, right? You're American, which means you're English. And yes, you're Greek as well. But still, you're probably more English than you realize. You're probably more that than you are Greek. Even, it's hard for people to see that. And so my view is, I don't know. There's probably no saving the bacon anyway. So it's all sort of, we're playing fantasy football where you have football players, in a way. But really, if America would understand that better and ground themselves in that, it should ground all the sense of identity. It's like, this is where we came from. Make a pilgrimage to England. Make a pilgrimage. They used to do this. They used to make a pilgrimage. There's a book called Americans' Pilgrimage to England, which has all the locations where all the people came from. And you can see their way of being. You see George Washington. That's where he came from. The North he came from. It came from, I think it's Durham. I did a video about this. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it's in the north. And you can see that in his way of being, how he is, and how he's not a lofty proposition. He's not a lofty philosopher like Jefferson, but he's sort of a farmer. He's a simple guy. But yeah, I won't go into too much detail about that, but just as a reply to what you were saying, I would ground it in that, really, because... And even like when you look at Quebec, when I see Pajot, I think, well, that's a Frenchman, isn't it? He even says he's not Canadian, right? Okay. Maybe Quebec should be its own nation, just in the sense that, but it's hard, isn't it? Because I'm just thinking about your point as to globalism, things being, okay, we're all living together. Well, that needs to stop. If we can just stop that and just have a really... Is that going to happen, though? I don't know. If the immigration is just going to be a lot slower, it's not going to happen, is it?
No, it's going the other way, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think of the Tower of Babel, right? Where this attempt, as well meaning as it is, of multiculturalism and this mixture and this melting pot. And I agree with your orientation towards the melting pot. it is really a type of Tower of Babel we're trying to bring a kind of a utopia on Earth, right? Things will just work out if every country had a McDonald's in it. It's actually a theory, the McDonald's theory, that if there's the golden arches in a country, they will not go to war with another country with golden arches in it. That's the idea, right? That we're now the fundamental bonds that tie us together is capitalism and consumerism and late stage capitalism. And that's why it's so there's beautiful, wonderful critiques of capitalism, but it's enough already. We've critiqued the hell out of it, and you're right. There's a lot of problems here, right? So, what is it that binds us, if it's not a place and a time? So, I want to ask you a couple things. You mentioned the mythos. Dugin again talks about. I don't know if I want to mention him because people have already this baggage.
Now.
Yeah, what I mean when I say him, I'm talking about the philosopher completely.
Yeah.
Like he's, and I'm not, against anything else, but I'm just saying the guy's a profound philosopher, probably one of the greatest living philosophers alive. I would say bar none. He's written so many deep books on Heidegger, and he writes specifically on this topic of the Dasein of civilization, the logos of civilization. He's wrote multiple books on each particular civilization. He has the logos of America, the logos of Russia. He goes through all of these deep dives into using a Heideggerian perspective to the logos of these different logi of these different civilizations. Another idea that he has is this transpositional nature of mythos and logos, right? Mythos is not some superstitious thing that's irrelevant anymore, right? So when we have something like science comes into the fold, where we're more technically minded, the mythos goes into the background, right? But it's always being transposed back and forth, right? The objective logos world and the mythos world are constantly kind of working through each other. That's why we see these old structures reemerging in different ways, in a sense. So in that vein, what does it mean when you say that we're English? What do you mean by English? Let's say, I'm English, and I agree with you from where you're coming from, but I'd like to know what you mean when you say that.
Well, I think, okay, in your pattern of behavior, in your under the propositional, I mean, in your way, your openness is, you're not purely that. There's other things that are, but fundamentally, yes, the common culture is that, but it has been more degraded. But thing is, we all have that modernism now. But yes, I mean that. Thing with the Heideggerian, really, that is kind of, okay, well, it does deal with sort of perspectival knowing, but I mean the procedural knowledge. I mean your patterns of behavior. I don't mean genetics at all. I mean culture. I mean
our politics, for sure. Our political
that's
machinations.
Even that's kind of propositional in a way, isn't it? It's become that in the sense that. But okay, well, look, there's some signs. One's common law, right? That's only in America, in the Anglosphere countries does this. What common law is really is, at its base level, it's become not this. It's a moral impulsion. Fundamentally, that's what the care is. Care is that value hierarchy. Even if it gets covered over by semblance, and I believe that half of America anyway, has been covered over by a propositional demon, which sort of disturbs care, disturbs what's underneath. But common law is that there was a Moses in every culture, but it comes from a moral impulsion, right? And so, what common law really is that it's a procedure for rendering that which is an unwritten law between us all about how we are to behave with each other. And so that's different to Roman law. That Roman law is from on high. That's okay. This is the regulator, Rex. Rex says this is what it is, and you do it. Whereas this is it's kind of represented in the Old English word kinning, which is king. King means kinning, as in son of the kin, really. And that moral impulsion is kind of the son of the kin. It comes out of the shared being with. It comes out of the unwritten way of being, the unwritten rules and laws between all of us, and then it's rendered into a proposition by this, and then that is generalized out to, and so that ends up being, now yes, it's been corrupted because the people have are possessed by a proposition, and they build a crappy precedent on a bad, because they want to corrupt the precedent, right? But in terms of when you go all the way back, though, that's what I mean. It's underneath. It's underneath. And those things haven't yet gone away. So I would say, but it takes a few generations to assimilate into. Plus, because there hasn't been great effort to have that assimilations. So you have these ghettos, right? You have communities that don't fully assimilate into American culture or into this. And because there has been this separation, has been this idea of everyone saying, no, we're this. But is it that much different? Not really. I also, with Dugin, I'm slightly suspicious of Dugin when it comes to England, because I know he really hates... I notice on his new Mac here, new Mac here, War of the Mind, is that he attributes a logos to everyone but England. It's the chapter headings. I haven't read the chapter because it's in Russian, but the chapter headings, French logos, this logos, and I think that's, look, I know, he's a philosopher, a great philosopher and all that. I don't dispute that. But I think he does definitely have a bias when it comes to that. They're the empiricists. They're this. They're just the non-logos. They're the, I haven't read the chapter on it, but I know what it's going to say. But I'm the greatest resistance to that neoliberalism comes from England itself, even though there are neoliberals in England. Like, naturally, our spirit is actually more traditional and conservative. And think about it. We still have a king. Even though it's been corrupted or whatnot by the parasite, that sort of neoliberal parasite and modernism, all these other places don't, though. So what does that mean? It means that in this people, they have this potential that's been waiting. So,
England. The English was the most successful and benevolent empire in the history of the world, right? It had its problems, right? We hyper focus on the problems of colonialism or whatever it may be. But and the problems of slavery, right? That's a very up-to-date kind of issue at hand, right? But today at work, I was talking with some friends and bringing up the idea of slavery, and they're on the left hardcore. And I said, where did slavery end? Like, what do you mean? Well, slavery is just the way the world has been forever, right? The Greeks were enslaved to the Turks for 400 years, just until 1830, right? Should I have animus towards my Turkish brothers and sisters now? Maybe. I don't, though. I don't think so, right? So the question is, where did slavery come to an end, at least on the global scale, right? England and the United States, right?
100%.
And that's true, right?
Yes, it was actually the real thing. A lot of these European countries said, "Oh, we're ending slavery in law," but we paid for it in the sense that the Royal Navy ended slavery. That's who particularly did it, by blowing up all the boats that would try slavery, right? And that's not even the payments that were only just paid off in 2016, mind you, which was paid for just to buy back all the slaves from the people and to fix all that part of it. So there was another debt that was paid, whatever. And people forget on the point of slavery is that all the Africans were the slavers. They were the people bloody selling them and enslaving each other and then selling them off to the Arabs and to all these different people, right? And people forget
it was
that
the way that
white
slavery was. Yeah, it was the currency of the world.
Yeah,
forever. So why is this the attack is on the English American kind of founding documents and founding fathers now because of slavery, when it's this weird thing, right? Because slavery ended in these cultures. And at the same time, these cultures are looked at as being the colonial cultures that are displacing and uprooting, the world in its entirety, is expanding and using up all of the resources, to feed upwards to the rich. And that's where the capitalism piece comes in. Where does this come from? This hyper critique, and I think it has to do. I guess the similar question is, where does this parasite, where does this corruption came, right? The most benevolent empire in history of the world that we know of. Where does this corruption come from that ultimately gets to the heart of every institution, whether it's religious or cultural or political? whatever it may be. Do you think socialism, communism, will that corruption at the heart of at the center of the human heart will go away? Like, where is this? What's the origins
Well,
of this?
I mean, I call it the scapegoat parasite, the scapegoater, sort of Guy-Radian, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because that fundamentally, that's just from thinking about it a lot. I thought that's what this fundamentally is. That's why it is the devil,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
it's all it's just blaming. When you look at it deeper down, it's not communism, it's not this, it's not that. Deeper. Oh, what are they doing? It's a scapegoating. It's a non-taking of your own responsibility. It's not bearing the cross. It's you're to blame. You're to
Mm-hmm.
blame, right? It's a railing against the world. It's the scapegoat. It's scapegoat parasite. Everything that's about that, right? And that's why it wins so easily, because it just
Mm-hmm.
goes from person to person. And that's all communism is. That's what Lenin did. He
Mm-hmm.
went around and scapegoat and rose up this resentment and they're to blame, right? And so the devil got to them. That's fundamentally what's underneath it, right? And think about it. If you're watching skeptical that it's the devil, think about it. Think it down to its bottom. What is this fundamentally? It's the scapegoater. It's the scapegoating of something. Fundamentally of the person onto something else, and that's where it breeds the resentment, and that's the thing that's taken advantage of. And I suppose the people that perpetuate whatever these things are, that's will to power. So they'll use any type of resentment they can to try take power of whatever. And of course, that's in the interest of some elites, I suppose, to perpetuate certain conflicts. But I don't think there's any top-down conspiracy other than that wider Davos, So they'll spur on certain conflicts, but that's always good. They were always going to be there anyway. But fundamentally, it's the scapegoater, I think. Well, what do you think? What do you think of that? Your own question.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think I bring up words like the devil and demons and diabolical, especially because the root word, and it gets to the point. What do you mean by the devil? Do you mean a cartoon with a red horned figure with a scary look on its face that scares kids? Well, that is a manifestation of what we're talking about here. But there's this fundamental energy, right? That's demonic and that is diabolical. Right? Diabolical is the inverse of symbolic. Symbolic means to come together, to throw together, to bring together, to unite. Sin, which means to unite, and voli, which means to throw. So symbolism is to throw together, right? It's to unify, right? And on this unification, an identity manifests itself, right? But something I've just been thinking about, there's also an identity that manifests through disunity. And the inverse of symbolic is diabolic, right? So to throw together, right, to bind is symbolic, but to tear apart is diabolic. But there's also an identity component that's tied into diabolic, because when you have this scapegoat mechanism, which I agree with you, right, is at the heart of things, right? That scapegoat is a mob phenomenon. That scapegoating is a mob phenomenon. And no matter how artificial or temporary it is, it binds a people together if they can point to say that is the cause of all of our problems. And if we destroy that, then we'll be good. And a lot of times the history has shown you that it is the case. A lot of scapegoats were murdered and then were deified, because after the murder of the scapegoat, there was a semblance of peace that came on the culture and the people for a period of time. Right. But Girard's whole point is that scapegoating process has been short-circuited by Christ. Right? Christ showed that the scapegoat was innocent, which leaves us in a strange place now, because we see these scapegoating mechanisms happening, fractally everywhere, but they can never bring this peace back, right? So it's just this continued escalation of scapegoating, right? And I think Donald Trump is a meta scapegoat, and he's being used, and it's such a technical thing for the technocrats to use to fit people against each other. And I agree with you. I don't think the origin comes from the mind of these technocrats, right? They're thirsty for power. And I don't mean it consciously, like, oh, if I do this, then I'm gonna have more power. It's just the way the world works is people tend to accumulate power, and unconsciously, especially, it's even worse if they think they're doing good. It's even worse, the World Economic Forum 2030 initiatives. It's better if it would be top down, and it's better if it would be like an organized plot to take over the world, because then you could say, oh, those are the people that are doing it. We just take them out and we're good to go. But this energy, this demonic influence is here, and it's always here. And the best thing, you might know who had this quote, the best thing the devil ever did was make people not believing him, like to make it a ridiculous thing when people talk about it. All right. So whenever we get to this point in this discussion and conversations, my question is like, is there hope at this level that there will be a unification in this world? Right? Because scripture tells us what ultimately happens in the end. Right? What the scapegoating mechanism has been short-circuited. We are moving towards hyper scapegoating, continued division, along with technologies that could destroy us all, pretty rapidly and quickly. I don't know where to have purchase in terms of hope when you look at it from a collective level. I can do it with my family. I can do it with my network of people that I relate to, right? That I have relationships with. I understand how to do it locally and to build community. And I think that's important. We need to continue to do that. But then when I look in the screen or I think about it from a collective level, I don't know where the hope is in that, and if there should be hope in that. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think with that is, I've thought about this a lot lately too. It's the difference between the black pill and the white pill, right? Which you probably know what those things are. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I know what you mean. And maybe it doesn't. At the least, there's going to be an arc. So you might as well build it under the presumption that whatever it is possible. Not politically to, let's retake the country. That could be possible, because possibility builds upon itself anyway, right? Who knows what the arc is exactly going to look like? It may be an arc that's not the whole implosion of the whole thing, and then we have no money at all, and China invades, and then there's this tiny little nestle of corn that's Christianity that's left, or whatever, or English culture, whatever it is. It might be quicker than that. It might be smaller than that. But even so, I know it looks apocalyptic with technology and everything, but I just think you build it anyway, and you work towards it and build a robust parallel economy, whatever it is, as best you can, and see what happens, right? I don't know, because you can't use, this is the sort of calculated thinking, isn't it? This idea that, okay, if we just add everything together that we currently are, it seems like it's impossible to fix the problems. It's to be in a situation where we're not in endless division and tearing apartness of all community into the individual unit of a mentally ill subject, which was never ever a human being anyway, the individual on his own.
Well, I think, like you said, the individual has never been the fundamental unit. Just bringing Rousseau back, right? Rousseau said we are born free and everywhere in chains. We are not born free. We are born absolutely helpless and need the help of our parents and our local environment to live, let alone thrive, for 18 years or however long it is, right? So we are fundamentally not individuals. We're just not. Give birth to an infant and let it. How long is it going to live if nobody circles it, surrounds it, and supports it? Right? Not very long, right? I think it's the same thing with what we're kind of seeing here, right? We need that support structure. We need community, right? We need unity and community, and we need something to bind us together in a sense. And we've seen it, like you were just saying, we've seen it kind of fling off at all levels, right? From the belief in God to a belief in a nation to a belief in a philosophy to now belief in science. You can't even believe in science anymore because the scientific method is like, that's the method's not corrupt, but it ultimately, the same corruption, the revolution and the Renaissance that happened that looked at the corruption in the Catholic Church and in the political institutions, the same thing that the left has critiqued to death and has done a great job in a lot of ways critiquing this parasite, right? The parasite has become the left. Like I was on the left for most of my life because I like the idea of looking at the power structure, looking at the hierarchy and saying, hey, look, there's corruption, right? And holding those in power to account in a sense, right? These are the things that I was drawn to, but things have inverted now where the very parasite that has been critiqued, late stage capitalism, colonial, whatever it may be, like that has become the parasite now, right? So it's like, what do we do now? Right. So I think that's why we go back to, and I think that's why it's happening naturally and organically, you're looking, what does it mean to be English? Let's go back to the stories of what made English great. And then let's go, back to Aristotle and back to Plato. And let's go back to these philosophers that were fundamental to the founding of the West, because the West has lost its identity. And, identity politics, not everybody can be proud of being from anywhere except the West, right? And there are problems there, right? And it's hard to even understand. And I agree with your critique of Dugin. He has harsh words. He's taken them back recently about the West and the collective West. And my question is, I guess a question that just emerged here is, what do we mean by the West, right? So we have right now in Ukraine, you have Russia against the collective West. That's the idea. Where does sovereignty lie now in the West? Where is sovereignty?
This is a great question in terms of the West. What is it? What is the distinction actually? Should it be a distinction? Shouldn't it? Should it not be? We'll go into this because it's something I've been thinking about lately as well. And we'll go into some things that we could say. Okay, where's the dividing line? Where does it end? And you can break that down and be a bit of a deconstructionist in that way and say, okay, for me, I think more helpful it's go with the languages. That's sort of what's compelling about Dugin in the fact that he's gone and said, okay, here's the French logos, here's the French Dasein, here's the French this and the German this and that. Because when you ask that question, okay, the first thing you say, you might think, okay, Christianity. Well, okay, what about Eastern Christianity? And you go, okay, well, what about Egypt? Egypt was Christian. What about Christians in Egypt, right? They were very close to Greece, closer than England is to Greece. Yes? And then, okay, then you might say, well, okay, metaphysics. Latin. Okay, yes, so the elites, the monks, they all spoke Latin. That's pretty much in Western Europe, but still it's in Russia too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the West, so that it's usually the distinctions are that it's metaphysics, but then you say, well, Syria had metaphysics, Egypt has still Christian, they had metaphysics as well, they were closer to Greece. Mm-hmm. But then you might say, well, okay, they've been taken over by Islam, so perhaps you can't really call them West anymore. Well, mm-hmm. Okay, still monotheistic. What about Lithuania? Lithuania was pagan up until the 1600s, right? That's Western. So, mm-hmm. But the biggest one is Russia, really, because Turkey's been taken over by Muslims as well, but Russia hasn't, and that's not considered the West. So, mm-hmm. Would it not be better to say, well, no, okay, English civilization, French civilization, how helpful is it? Because I think the term originally was invented, the West, not Occidental, but the West was invented in an American university in 1920, the West. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it probably leads to a bit of delusion too, because we go, okay, yes, we're very similar, but it is different. And there's a bit of delusion in the idea post-World War II, because a lot of our way flooded in, not our way, but we wrote the Germans' constitution, Mm-hmm. So the neoliberal, and I don't think we're fundamentally neoliberal, like I've said already. I think we're more traditional in the English way of being. I think that comes from continental Protestantism. I don't believe the Anglican Church fundamentally is Protestant. I think it's Alter Imperium. It's a mm-hmm. Catholic church. If Rome is different from the Eastern Orthodox Church, it's the same for the Anglican Church, even though I understand liberalism's completely corrupted the Anglican Church, right? I've been attending a bloody Orthodox church, for Christ's sake, so I'm baptized into it. But point is, it's confusing with the West because, again, the writing of the constitutions of these places, there's a lot of these countries tried to take on a kind of, they looked at the laws and system, the Eastern Europeans, we'll try have a constitutional monarchy. Well, it doesn't work, right? Because you're not English. you need to really have it in your being, because what would happen is, it works because it's the head of the church. It works because it has this history. They tried it, it didn't work. All these Eastern European countries, Roger Scruton talks about this, is that mm-hmm. the post-Soviet Union, they tried that and it sort of failed this. And you can see the continentals are different, and they have all these minor parties that form, coalitions rather than two-party system. And obviously the two-party mm-hmm. system's all broken anyway. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's where I've been going on that question. So metaphysics, Occidentalism is, I suppose it's really down to that. But what about everything underneath that? Because even philosophers have a bias for the propositional. What about the procedures, the patterns of action? They're in the procedural. What about the perspectival? I haven't read much Dugin, but I imagine he probably goes into that with the logos of Cybele and the logos of, I imagine they are a kind of non-propositional logi. Is that the idea? That the logos of Dionysus is a kind of action, a logos of action or poetry? I've read the chapters on that. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
What are those logi?
Yeah, you could think of it as, so we have the logos of Apollo, right, which is the logos of the sun, of meaning, of the Apollonian gods. And you have the logos of Cybele, which he didn't have a theory of the logos of Cybele. It emerged. He was really exploring the logos of Dionysus and the logos of Apollo, right? And then in exploring these civilizations, he found this third logos, which was the logos of Cybele, which was the black logos, right? And when he says the logos of Dionysus, he attaches a philosopher to each logos to kind of explicate it. So the logos of Apollo is Plato, right? The ideals, the form, right? The heavenly forms, right? The logos of Dionysus is Aristotle, right? And what does Aristotle do? Aristotle synthesizes the ideals, the ideal of Plato, right, with the practical nature of things. So I think it's like a Christ figure or the mediator. He mediates between the light and the dark. Logos of Cybele is darkness. It is chaos, pure chaos, disorder, but it's potential as well. It's, so there's this interplay, and he sees these three structures in every civilization he's ever looked at. He said he's got a lot to say about these different African civilizations that he's looked at, but he hasn't, at least I haven't seen any writings on that. But there's this tripartite fundamental structure to every civilization and every culture, and it's a mixture between these three logi, right? And it's fascinating, and he critiques the West. He critiques the West as being this ultimate inaugurator of this type of thinking, empiricism, behavioralism, propositionalism, where it's like these things are great in their particular place if they're appropriately in the hierarchy, but once they become focused on, then they become the idol to worship, right? That's when we have the problem, right? And he says that it's the very Antichrist that it's going to emerge through the opening in the West, right? And it's emerging right now through the idea of this techno-utopian. It's working through the elites in a sense. So when we talk about the question of what is the West, right? Who is it that's making the decisions? Because there's a decision that's being made and is coordinated amongst Canada, the United States, England, Australia, New Zealand, right? Who is making that decision? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's a strange thing, because there's no way to point to where the corruption is. Back if you had a king and the king became corrupt, people would usurp and overthrow the king. We're in a situation now where we have exactly. Yeah. Now we have a Medusa. Now we have this what's the word I'm looking for? This Hydra, where it's just everything's ambiguous. And now that we're living in a post-truth world, at least from the major media perspective, and this is something that I wanted to double click a bit with your background here. We're living in this post-truth world where we can't make heads or tails of things, where, for something like the coronavirus, right, there would be all these scientific, these articles published in previously trusted scientific journals that would be at odds with each other. And whatever your particular position was, you could find very valid scientific reasoning and conclusions that you could share with your friends in stupid text threads. Oh, look at this, ivermectin works. Like, no, it doesn't. Here's my. So we're living in this weird, kind of post-truth world, and I think that's where the critique of, the Antichrist will come in, right? Because the truth can never go away; it can be twisted, and it's being twisted, and it's being amplified by our technologies. And there are people that understand how these technologies work, right? And especially the psychotechnology of advertising and propaganda, right? And I know you had a background working in advertising, right? So how did that appear to you? Were you aware of this type of, what was Freud's nephew, Bernays, right? Bernays brought modern propaganda to the United States from Austria, and we actually had the Department of War. He changed it to the Department of Defense. Right, this whole Orwellian doublespeak in a sense, coupled with digital media technologies and the psychotechnology of propaganda and the propagating of ideas and how that works. Did you experience that? What was that like in terms of working in the field that you emerged out of, the advertising agency? If you can reverse engineer them for the good, I think that's part of a way of
Absolutely.
a collective solution that I'm
That's
trying
what
to envision.
filmmaking
I'm sorry, go
is
ahead.
when it's done. That's what filmmaking is when it's done for its own sake. That's when it's done for... Well, this is the nature of propaganda. This is a great question. The nature of what is art, what is propaganda. But on the first thing you were talking about America and us being blamed for the sort of technocracy and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, as Heidegger talked about, this is why I don't like Dugin, the way he talks about it, is because it was embedded in metaphysics. The techne was always going to end up here. And who's to say that wouldn't have happened in Russia, even if later, on its own? They had metaphysics too. So that's just the first thing on that. But in terms of... okay, so that was coming anyway. You can't blame England for the Industrial Revolution. Okay, that's modernism, it's them. Well, hang on. Again, metaphysics. If it's embedded in metaphysics in Cartesian dualism, that radical subject, then it's coming in France anyway. It was coming anyway. So, but as to, yes, Avatar, what's the difference between advertising? What's the difference between that? Okay. Well, look, propaganda is a closing downness on... It's enslaving the audience to the idea that you want them to have. It's like when Tolkien talks about the difference between allegory. In a way, an allegory is kind of propaganda, a pure allegory, because you just have to, you don't bring it into your openness. It doesn't open a true, because that's what art ultimately does. It's a work set up, it's truth put to work. So a painting, whatever it is, truth as in raw being, as in fundamental ground of what this artist or poet has seen in the primordial logos, has seen it gather, and then has brought it into the secondary logos, the words, which should bring you, which is the work, which basically has that truth in it, which is the logos, let's say in a poem, that is the that is the truth put into the work. That is the work or the words. And so when you read them again and really try to get behind those things, that's where the art is. That's where the demigod is. And so you think about a film, it's the same thing. That's why it helps to even think about a painting in terms of art like a film, because, thinking about it, it's like a spring. It's like the art has a spring in it, which is the work. And instead of like equipment, when you use equipment, it becomes invisible. You don't see it. It's utilitarian. But this type of work, when you look at it, presents itself. It unfolds to you, and that's opening to you. For the audience, again, thinking about a film, think about it temporally. Over time, you watch it, don't you? You watch it, it opens something to you over time. So its work is opening a world to you over time, which is this truth or primordial thing that the artist originally had. Now, if it's true, if it's not propaganda, if it's not woke Lord of the Rings, then that true way of being that's in it will work for the person. Will work for the person when they imitate it. Let's say if it's a story, when they imitate it, it's because it's got real true being in it, right? Also, it has a higher fidelity. Truth has higher fidelity because that way of being. Let's say I have take an unfolded English way of being and put that into a film. That's connected to the openness. That's connected to what other Englishmen have in their openness, right? So that means that it has a higher fidelity to integrate and grab you. That's why so many people were compelled by Peterson. He built an empirical bridge, and he used a story and connected stuff they were confused propositionally, but it was in their procedural knowing. It was in their way of being. And so once those two things were connected, same thing with a film. A film shows you a perspective. If it's connected with that thing, it should grab you more. That's why it's compelling. So when people watch some of my videos, I break down Robin Hood and do that, right? Unpack it and compare it to their way of being. And they see that, and their confusion about what they've been told they are, propositionally, is the semblance is removed, this truth, and that has a higher fidelity. So propaganda does the opposite. It's putting you into this one thing. You do that. This is exactly what it means. It's not connected. Well, it's an in order to, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a procedure for their outcome. So the whole work is a thing set up in order to you think this. So the whole thing.
Instrumental.
Yes, the whole
instrumental.
thing. Yeah. The whole thing's instrumental.
I think the notion of Vervaeke's idea of addiction being reciprocal closing, right, and the overcoming of addiction is a reciprocal opening. That's what came to mind when you were talking about, and I think it's right on. Propaganda, it delimits we're free will. We have freedom, and what delimits that freedom, which constrains it in a way, a negative way in a sense, not even a negative way. I don't know what the word I was looking for there, but it's a reciprocal closing of possibility. And a lot of the media that we consume now shows us all the things to be fearful of, constantly, and not in a way that rouses bravery and courage out of you. Is it a way that rouses more anxiety so you can buy the pills that are sold to you during commercials? Like it's this weird feedback loop. And I think that something like watching TV or films is a profound spiritual thing that we have no idea what it is, right?
Yes.
I think when you're sitting there looking at a screen for hours at a time, right? You've suspended your disbelief, you've opened up your consciousness, and these images just come in and evoke emotions, and these emotions are just almost as real as being involved in the situation. And you invest your care and your concern in these characters that pull you in and they drag you in, right? So it's a spiritual experience, and I think that's why it's important to look at it as such, right? And we focus on the hyper negativity of propaganda and social media and these digital technologies that are dissolving our bounds. But I think what you're doing and how you're explaining it reminds me of kind of Jonathan Peugeot's idea of symbolism, right? If you have to start talking about symbolism, there's a problem in the world, right? Just like if you have to start talking about the features that make Robin Hood meaningful, right? We're at an impasse here, right? So it's like, it's a challenging thing, but I didn't mean to cut you off there because you were going to go on some great places there. And so if you watch Game of Thrones, you said Lord of the Rings, but Game of Thrones, the new one, have you seen any of those episodes?
Yes.
And I point this out all the time. My wife kind of gets annoyed that all of these stories that capture us are fundamental biblical stories, right? And this story, the one that I see played out more than any, is the story of Cain and Abel. And the story of the new Game of Thrones is you have the noble king who has power. He doesn't really want power. And you have the brother, who's this evil brother who's chopping up people in the city in the first episode. So there's this fundamental tension that's posed between brothers, between Cain and Abel. And that's why the show brings you in, because it's hitting on a fundamental structure of our reality, and I think, again, what Peterson's doing, he's pointing to that happening, right? So there is a fundamental structure, there is a logos there is a truth there, and movies and film and art that really pull you in are manifesting that spiritually. So I thank you for sharing it like that, because I think that kind of made a lot of sense to me there. But sorry, go ahead.
I know what you mean in terms of I've had this recently because I've cut myself off a lot from news. I've always done that. I've cut myself off from social media. I remember I deleted it a long time ago. I remember when the transgender thing first happened. I didn't even know about it for a year because I cut off internet, and so all of a sudden I saw it just appear overnight. I thought, what the hell happened? Anyway, that I digress. Yes, so I know that the feeling that you mean when you talk about that. I was sitting and watching Netflix, and I just, whatever it was, and I thought, and you start getting drawn into a story, and I thought, hang on, I shouldn't care about these people. I shouldn't care. I shouldn't be watching these people. We shouldn't be so much involved in the lives of people that we don't know. It's just fundamentally, it's okay for it. Fundamentally, it's why it's so disgusting where we are. It's just so disgusting. We should be telling each other stories. We should be I should be telling you the story of Robin Hood, and we should be at a campfire. We were never meant to have it decentralized and have it sent to us by on high, by some pantheon of degenerates, right? But think about when you get this insight when you pull yourself off of it. I know that sounds trivial. Oh, well, hang on, but we're in the model world. But when you disconnect yourself for a bit, you think, because when you look at your own being enough, when you read into enough philosophy, and you start looking at your monitoring, if you meditate and you pray and you're paying attention to things that draw you, you pay attention to things that you're being pulled, aren't you? You're being pulled by the different things. And so you notice, and you're watching something, and I'm pulled into this. I shouldn't care about this. I shouldn't see this pretty woman, right? I should be the pretty woman on the street. It should be it's just, our care shouldn't be involved in that. Our care shouldn't be involved in someone that's so far away, even someone else's culture. I shouldn't care about that. I shouldn't know about that. In a way, when it's just really far away, it's just, I get it, curiosity, but isn't that just idle curiosity? Isn't that the Heideggerian, oh, what's this thing's interesting? It's not a deep, dwelling, opening art.
Das Man.
Yeah. Well, that's what it really fundamentally is, where we are possessed by the tyranny of the they. We always have the they, of course, but the tyranny of it, it's become so much more what it is. It's more powerful in its ability to draw our attention. But I just had that feeling when you mentioned that. I remembered that feeling, that I felt that we just I shouldn't care. I shouldn't be drawn. I shouldn't even be watching this person. That's worship, isn't it? In a way, a good movie's fine. I mean, I often said is that it'd be great if we didn't even know who these actors were. We shouldn't know who they are. It should be a different one. It should be, it should be irrelevant. It should just be a story. But yeah, fundamentally, when you do a bit of theatre, and the theatre emerged in England, right? It was the communities of people. They would have the local parish would buy a play, and it was a Robin Hood play. And that's how Robin Hood emerged as a mythos hero. And then the villagers in every local village would act it out on May Day. They would embody the procedures, right? This is kind of like what Viveki talked about, what is it, in that LARPing thing, the role-playing thing. But this is it in terms of its fundamental, village life, is they're quite literally being this hero, enacting their way of life and seeing how and they're not even thinking about it. This is just it's just a thing they're doing. Yet it would affect them and affects their way of being, and it transforms how they act their life. They're in that liminal space when they are, and because it started as the king. And then Robin Hood emerged, and then he became the main character of these. And this was every village across England that were doing this, right? And there's records of the parish plays that they paid for them. The church would pay for them. Point is, though, they're participating in it. We're not participating in it anymore. And that's the thing about the fundamental sort of anthropology, looking into it. You can still do this, and you should go to your local bar, especially if you're a man who doesn't have to, well, even a family man can. But you have a dive bar in America. That still exists. It's where you banter, you talk shit, tell stories. We shouldn't be a unit going back to watch Netflix. We should be at least go out, form a community bubble, at least go to the pub or a club where you talk banter with guys and you sit at the bar and do that. That's what a pub is in England. A pub is in Australia. A pub is in New Zealand. Because that's where we tell stories. We're supposed to do that. We're not supposed to have it beamed to us from on high. And yeah, that's just what came to me. Anyway.
Yeah.
Throw that back.
No, amen to that. It's a strange phenomenon, just to piggyback a little bit on that. Like the people that I'm closest to and that I've known the longest, when we get together in the pub again, what do we do initially? We cut on each other. We start jabbing at each other. It's something that's important to do. And it's from the outside or from maybe a women's perspective, it's like, what are you guys doing? You guys are like cutting on each other, but no, we're close. Like you make inappropriate jokes to each other, right? It's a strange thing of how people that you care about. That's why the PC culture is so disintegrating, because it doesn't allow that for happen into the workplace, but now even in our places of relating to people at the bar or whatnot, these things become unconscious. And instead of playing out, making jokes inappropriate or not, they become repressed. And it actually leads to violence because you can't let it out. We're a people that imitate. We're we're a mimetic species, right? Constantly. And if that mimetic process doesn't have an outlet into humor, then it becomes pent up and it turns into violence in a sense. And I couldn't think of I saw this show on Netflix again. I think it was on Netflix. It was about Woodstock 99. Remember that? So they tried to recreate the original Woodstock, which happened in 1969, and they did it in 1999. And if you want to see the phenomenology of an egregore, if you want to see how mass hypnosis psychosis works in the most gross way, in the most fundamental way, watch that documentary and watch the crowd of people. You know, you had the biggest rock stars in the world there, right? At that time, Rolling Stones, Limp Bizkit, like whatever it was, just this huge thing. And they tried to recreate this peace and love that emerged in the 1960s with regards to Woodstock. They did it in a completely corporate way where profit became the main motive, right? And they stripped, there was 250,000 people. I was on an Air Force base, and they stripped them of all the food and even water that they had before they came onto the campsite. And they had these vendors there, and the vendors were independent contractors, so they could charge whatever they wanted for food. So back in 1999, they were charging crazy amounts for bottled water, $4, $7, $11, right? And it was completely mismanaged, and the anger started penting up in people, right? And then you had the rock groups. Korn was there, started playing and moving the crowd, and you actually can see the outline of the egregore in the crowd. It's the craziest thing. You see the waves from the rock stars, and you could see them. They move as one. And somebody in the documentary mentioned, he's like, I saw something that just defies the laws of physics. I saw a group of 1,000 people move as one organism. He actually said it like that. I'm like, oh my Lord, you know. So that's a really poignant way to observe this phenomenon of the egregore, right?
But,
and
can I just drop an example
please,
in?
please.
And I don't want to just on what you said. Because I don't like that. I'm going to stop using the word egregore because I think it's demon only, right? So I'll just say hyperagency. And at the Liverpool Football Club back in the 70s, the same thing would happen. If you look at the really old videos, 1920s, and they would sing this song, is that "You'll Never Walk Alone," and they're at their game, and the way they move is the same. The way they move, it's like a being. It's a being. It's really strange, and they killed it. They killed a beautiful, positive egregore, which is this: you'll never walk alone. We're bound together in this community, and that's what football is supposed to be. It's supposed to be that localism, that local with their Geist. And the point is, it was the same thing as you can observe it. Then they started to standardize it, so it's almost the opposite of what you're talking about. With the corporatism created this demon, and this one killed off a positive one by. They standardize it. They play the song "You'll Never Walk Alone" at the match. No, they sing it themselves. They nominated that song as their song, and they sung it. And at the opportune moment when it just came to this being, this distributed cognition of the whole thing, and they'd sing that "You'll Never Walk Alone," and it was this thing, and it's really moving, man. When you see it, it's just moving. There's this whole being, this massive being singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." It's that's Robin Hoodish in a way. It's the merry men all together. But yeah, we can go back on what you were talking about. I just want to insert a positive hyperagency in there, because these are the things that protect us from the negative ones. Is these that are under Christ, but we need them as well. But get back to you on your. That's a great example.
No, I think I'm gonna actually kind of what came up for me there, right, is back to this. The clash of the Titans and the Apollonian gods, the gods of Apollo and the gods of the Titans, right? The old pagan, prior to Indo-European culture gods, which have been put under wraps from the Christianization of the world, right? But now as Christianity recedes, and it is receding, right? We're seeing the reemergence of these pagan influences through collective hyperagencies. And I just had a picture in my mind of the idea is that we are spiritual warfare is fought through humans, right? So these hyper agents, the Apollonians, ones that are embodying the we will not walk alone, right? Versus these disintegrated. So it's like these hyper agents are warring with each other. There's a war reemerging in the heavens, but it's fought through human bodies. So I think that's where the idea of we don't fight against flesh and blood, we're fighting against powers and principalities. It's absolutely correct. It's absolutely right. And it's important to not scapegoat someone or a group of people by understanding. This is important. I think that it's not the flesh and the blood, the person that we're fighting, right? It's the idea that's captured them, right? Look what happened in the Nazi Germany is another great example of a hyper demon, an egregore, right? You see Hitler making these speeches, and the people are transfixed, right? So this is a psychotechnology, a collective psychotechnology, and I think it's something that we need to reorient and reverse engineer through the digital media technologies that are at hand here now. And that's I don't know, I keep coming back to that. Yeah.
And I think that people listening is that heaven's real. It exists right now. And the ancients understood that heaven was world. It was heaven is spirit. You can call it, if you're a materialist and you're watching, mind. It's but it's also under the surface. It's in world existential analysis. Well, Heideggerian terminology. World it's patterns that you see. It's ontological. It's outside of what you might be present to you, because there are things happening that aren't present to you. That's present at hand is what you're looking at currently. That's all. That is heaven. That's where Jesus is. That's all. That's this. The other point I want to make, is I thought a lot about this too, is that some of these pagan gods are fine if they were integrated under Christ, right? Odin's okay because you need a warrior, right? The under Christ, though, right? If you watch the Northmen, a lot of pagans love this, and that's fine. I don't want to be too pagan, but because it is part of us, right? Plato's pagan. All these people are pagan. They're part of it. It is part of these values. These values, they are part of those hyperagencies, right? These justice, all these things existed. The main new value in Christianity is that it's before giving, and all the other values that are related to that. But yeah, I just wanted to say that those things are still there. They don't go away because it's only been 1,000 years, right? So we need to understand that. But you don't want to live like the Northman. If you look at the Northman, the movie, that guy is I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen the Northman? It shows you what it's like. Yeah, it's worth watching just as a good movie. But it shows you what it's like when you're in an endless cycle of vengeance. That's how everyone will be living their life if there's no. Because what's fundamental to the West being is the Christian element of you can let go of these things because you're forgiven. You can't just be in this endless cycle of it gets you away from. It's like it's that eye for an eye thing. It's that cycle of vengeance, and that's what your life's going to be like, right? If you have that, those values are great in terms of martiality. Martial will that are part of the European, if they have above them forgiveness, if they have above them these things, right? And so I just wanted to say that, I know there's probably some pagans that watch this channel, but
well, it's not the pagans are, the structure of the cosmos, right? And they are, important, played a wonderful role for the logos to eventually manifest itself in the world, right? Without the pagans, the pagans had the logos run through them, just as the Hindus did, just as the Native Americans, right? The logos, before he was made flesh in Christ, right? Christ embodied the pattern for us to see, right? The pattern we had to infer through our wisdom traditions and through Lao Tzu and through all these wonderful, more propositional type figures, right? But Christ came, and here's the pattern that manifested itself from heaven in the flesh, and he showed you, imitate me, and it will stop the cycle of endless vengeance and scapegoating. Yes. If you imitate anybody else, anyone else, right? Ultimately, you can imitate whomever, right?
You definitely should intimate in certain situations, but ultimately,
yeah. But if you're not appropriately oriented towards Christ, and I know that sounds like exclusionary, right? If you're not properly oriented to the highest ideal, then you're going to make what you're imitating an idol, and you're going to develop a rivalry between the people that are imitating each other. And that rivalry, if it's collective and intense enough, will lead to destruction, right? Christ said, hey, follow me, right? And imitate me. And this was, I think, Gerard's point. And in doing so, you will, you don't fix your gaze to the crowd because you'll be pulled in, right? Think of that in terms of digital media, right? We're constantly fixed, collectively. I mean, me and you, but me and you to an extent. Yeah, right? We're fixed on the television, the news, right? This constant diet of disinformation, of hyperinformation without knowledge or wisdom, right? We pay a lot of attention to what we put in our belly, right? The nutrients that we take into our belly through the food that we eat. We want to eat right. You want to eat the right food. You don't want to eat like crap. You'll feel like crap. You'll gain weight. It's the same as above, so below. The same thing we do when we take in images, right? We're taking images into our nervous system, and that's informing us. Just like we eat food into our gastrointestinal system, and it's informing our bodies. We need to be more mindful, more aware of the power of images to become idols. They almost always do. So and it's interesting that those that critiqued this endless cycle of vengeance that they saw in institutions, political, religious, or whatnot, right? All this corruption, they are now talking about it. They're now enacting endless cycles of vengeance with, struggle sessions and all this stuff that happens, that we see from these cultural revolutions that happen in China now, that's happening in America as well. It is the very thing that is being critiqued is now emerged as the organizing principle. And it's almost impossible to articulate this to someone, well-meaning person, good heart. I have this, friends and family members, but they're taken over by this mind virus. They're taken over by these images that are so ingrained. It's very hard to get through to them.
Yes.
And I myself, we're all in some kind of trance, right? We're all in some kind of hypnosis, right? More or less the extent, right? So I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but I
that's great.
Just a comment on that.
It's on that idea of trance. I suppose that's where world comes in. As soon as you walk into God's being, when you walk, it's hard to break it down to see raw being, to get into, when you walk out of your house and you see the world at certain times of night or whatever, okay, you do get grounded by that, don't you? So of course that always helps. But in terms of what you're talking about, the trouble with it is, the reason why it's so dangerous is this damn thing, this propositional parasite. Its tendrils go into our actually useful care, useful value hierarchy, and they game them. Let's say if I rendered it into a proposition, an Englishman must always overcome tyranny. Let's just say that's a propositional description of a behavioral tendency of, okay, so when you're tyrannized, it's in our nature to do that. So let's say this proposition, what it does is, you could think about that like St. George or Thor. Thor's underneath St. George, This propositional demon renders things purposely as false dragons, as false tyrannies. So it games this for the regular folk. That's why it's so deceptive. Like you said, it's so complicated and so dangerous, because it's able to do that. And that's one thing it does, is it games our positive values, because these values they're not rational. They respond to a certain pattern of behavior. You can think of them like, they're also cycles too. If you have a cycle of behavior, for instance, Brexit, that's a cycle happens. A Robin Hood emerges, Nigel Farage, whatever. You see him do that. He's fighting a tyrannical state. He unifies with the king. That's why people got behind it, because they saw it's a cycle. It's in the care. It's in care. It's noticed by care. So that's what it does. The propositional demon does that particular one. I think it's why I think one of the reasons why it's particularly powerful in English-speaking countries, because it games it as a tyranny and makes it a fake tyranny. So how do you do that? I've seen some Christian people these days, I think maybe you have talked about this once or twice, is preparing Christians and saying, these are the values they're going to make it look like. They're going to make it look like charity. They're going to make it look like this. Don't be drawn in by them faking your value, by them faking this thing that will draw you this image, this cycle, because that's what they do, right? So it's a sort of preparation, isn't it? And that's a psychotechnology in itself. It's a response. And we have to exact, don't we? We have to use the new. We have to use the things to combat these things. But that being said, though, I think we do need to remain deeply traditional. That's why I like you Orthodox guys, right? It's yes, exact, but keep this core thing what it is. Because if you stop this bloody Protestantism, no, bad. Stop with that, right? You exact the technology, do this, but the core thing, that is so much more powerful. It evolved over time and emerged, and was emerged in the environment. You'd be top down, so I shouldn't say emerged, but the traditions themselves, right? They're thousands of years old. They're so much more smarter than we are. This thing is, you're one person. It was so arrogant. think that we know. Also, I just make a brief point about freedom. That's another completely misunderstood thing because of how we've rendered into propositions and the confused, even the way the founding fathers talked about it. It's freedom is the absence of tyranny. That's it. Right? You want constraints. We want constraints. Like you talked about earlier, is that we emerge in this thing. We're thrown into the world. You're aligned. You're part of this wider organism. Those constraints, most of them are, right? It's ordered. It's an ordered. You create an ordered situation. This is what England just did so well, just naturally. It's what common law is. An ordered situation where you're enabled by those constraints, as you know, in using Viveki terminology. They're enabling constraints. So this idea of ultimate freedom is so dumb. It's like liberty, French, to do what I want. No, you don't get to do what you want, right? And I don't even think Americans don't like kings. They love a president to step in like a Chad and go, this is wrong, right? That's what, it's just bullshit. It's just they've made, because it was necessary in the Revolutionary War to sort of propagandize and say, oh, the king, the evil, even though it was never really the king that was doing it. It was the elites in the parliament. But even so, point is, a benevolent king is a good thing. And Americans like a benevolent king, you know, at least the Americans that are still American, that haven't been totally possessed. But yeah, maybe you might want to respond to that, or else, yeah.
Yeah, it's the right word too. I think possessed, and I think that your term there, propositional demon, is what Heidegger's talking about. Like the phenomenology of this propositional demon is in framing. It is turning the world into standing reserve. It is instrumentalizing all resources towards a goal that is not really clear, like to us, right? It looks like for the accumulation of capital into the hands of a very few, but I think it's kind of deeper than that. And the thing that I like about orthodoxy, right? I fell away from the church. I used to go as a child with my grandma all the time. About 12, 13 years old, I stopped going, and I didn't return until about 5 years ago. So it's a long kind of, a long time coming to come back to it. But I like the idea when you say the tradition, right? What do we mean by tradition? It's not old people with old ideas, right? A tradition is a living thing. We call Orthodox the patristic synthesis of now and the future is the living tradition. The tradition can come up against anything, and because it is the truth, it is real, right? It can mold the world to its structure in a sense, right? And I think that's why I think that it's important to distinct that the tradition does not mean just going to homestead and getting a bunch of chickens and a bunch of land. That's what tradition is. That is a manifestation of tradition. It's a caricature, but it's a character of tradition, right? But tradition is bringing these values, these ideas, these virtues, the good, the true, and the beautiful to meet any circumstance that comes about. So the tradition needs to be alive, living, vital, and active in the world. And I think that is a marker of hope that it gives me, right? Because the truth cannot be distinguished. It is like a light, right? And no matter how much wax or how much wax accumulates around that flame, it never burns out. And what we're witnessing, I think, is the increase in the intensity of the light, right? And in doing so, the wax, which is the very structure of our institutions, right, is being melted. And we're focused on the melting pieces flying everywhere. And like, look, this is terrible. Look at all this wax that's melting off everywhere. But there's also a light shining through what's being dissolved, right? And to focus on that light, and you can feel it in conversation, you can feel it in relationship, you can feel it at work, you can feel it come through from time to time, right? And there's other times where it's more dark and kind of a hopeless, angst-ridden kind of environment, but then you see the light come through again. So we're seeing this manifestation of darkness and light because we're in a time of change, and I think that it's important to double click again on your concept that you brought up here of freedom, right? Freedom to do what? Like, we want to be free to do what, right? And it's the value of freedom constrained by responsibility is elucidated beautifully by podcaster and former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink. He's got a book. It's entitled Discipline Equals Freedom. Discipline equals freedom. Well, that sounds like a paradox. What do you mean discipline equals freedom? When we look at the ascetic practices of the church, right? To be free is to subordinate yourself to Christ. See, I knew you guys were fascist. You're talking about subordinate yourself. Not subordinate yourself to someone's interpretation of Christ, not subordinate yourself to the institution, which there's a role for that, but you need to subordinate yourself to Christ, to the mystery, right? It's the first commandment, right? Thou shalt have no other gods than me. Right? Is that a jealous God? No. So that means if you don't orient yourself, you don't plug yourself into the infinite, right? Whatever you invest your care in, which happens automatically, right, will eventually lead to destruction and disintegration. So the thing is, to be free is to be ascetically be wedded to Christ, and then you will be free, right? But if you're not my own life dealing with addiction and issues throughout my entire life, like to be free, if people are free, if we just everybody gets enough financial resources, now everybody's going to be happy, and when the machines take over, everybody's going to get their universal basic income and everybody's going to be thriving and happy. No, they're not. Like, the phenomenon in America, when the people win the lottery, there's a high number of people that win their lottery, right? Millions of dollars. And they're destroyed. Their life is destroyed, right? Because they don't have the spiritual infrastructure. They don't have the wherewithal, the bandwidth to manage all of these resources now, right? You give an addict $100,000, he'll be dead in a week, right? So the good intention of, hey, we need to help these people. They're poor, which is noble, right? And in doing so, you take away their right to suffer and overcome and persevere their sin, right? Their particular cross to bear. If you just give them a handout, right, that has been forced from the top, right? That's why I think this idea of I'm a little bit all over the place here. This idea of equity, this idea of equity, right? It's a noble thing to have a society where equity emerges organically from the people, right? But to install equity from the top down is demonic. It is the root of tyranny. Because to say that we need to have equal outcomes for all people, you're going to have to pull down the people that are doing well, right? Not just pull up people that aren't doing well, but pull down the people. So you stop giving grades. They stop now in California having advanced courses in school, right? And the idea is, we just need to make things more equitable. So the people at the top, right, if it's done appropriately of the competence hierarchy, are the beacons of hope that people can imitate appropriately and move up, and there pull the society out of its dross, in a sense. And that is an organic, wonderful thing that is the very essence of overcoming suffering. We're trying nobly to say we need just to distribute resources and give people financial wealth, and then they're going to be thrive and have well-being. That is not the case. Like, it's just more freedom to eat more McDonald's, more freedom to get the new iPhone, more freedom to get the new car, more freedom to get the bigger boat than your neighbor has, until he gets the bigger boat. And then boom, there that rivalry goes. So you have all these rich people in the United States that are completely miserable. People see it, they know it, but they still, that the mimetic pull is so strong. We see these movie stars on TV that got everything: the woman, the wife, the car, the status, everything the society tells you is the thing to get, and they kill themselves. They destroy their lives. People see it, but we still are forced. We're still in that pull of imitating the wrong people, in a sense. So I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, well, look, I do think what C.S. Lewis said this: in absence of a king to imitate, that you'll imitate prostitutes, billionaires, and porn stars. So some types of billionaire are okay to imitate, of course, but because it is selected by capital, the king has a function. The king, especially a symbolic king, I said all these things: the OBE, the award system, the honors. Those things are the king's duty from out of the narrative order. Is that he is above the state, and it's a spirit too. It's a Geist, and he needs to. The mortal needs to imitate the Geist. Needs to imitate this spirit which is in us too. This mortal, the spirit, is to go down and lift up that which is being, the state or the machine is attacking, and say, this is the ideal, because it's in the spirit, right? Because it's in the mind. The body, which is, let's say us, the body needs to, possessed by the appropriate hyperagency, to lift up this thing, to say this is the ideal, this is what you should imitate. So in absence of that structure, in absence of these Christian orders, the order of the British Empire, all these things where you award those things, and they've all been co-opted into a sort of they have actually been co-opted into in a way, a commerciality, because given because of business. It's all okay. The OBE is so often given for people who bring business and capital to a place, right? Rather than a cultural thing, like someone that's saving the country or whatever, right? Like what I'm doing, I'll never get anything like that, right? I'll be probably persecuted for it, right? Being a traditionalist, right? But point is though, on that subject, damn it, what you raised so many good things there. But a lot of people that are saying this is wrong, right? Okay, that means there is whatever it is, that at the least that's the arc. It means it's in our care. It means it's still there, underneath. I think that's in more people than people realize. It's just because they've been possessed. I don't know if those people can be brought back, but it is still part of our being, even if it's disconnected from it. And there's also that thing that Heidegger talked about, which is that emptiness, feeling that something's missing. That means there is, well, he talks about the gods having fled, but there's a living tradition, the living body. You can engage with the god, but that feeling of emptiness is simply it means it's there in care. It means it's actually there. It's just it's covered. The veil's covered, and you don't have access to it. So that's why the poets are doing what they're doing. They've been possessed, but it does mean it's still part of you, or else you wouldn't care at all, would you? You would say, this is just life. You'd be possessed by whatever thing you're doing, and you would never come up for you at all if it wasn't still part of your being in some way. Which means that, if people want to take hope from that. But what I've taken recently, because I don't like to be black-pilled, but I think it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant if there's no saving it, because at least there's going to be an arc. So you might as well go, we'll see what we can do here, right? You might as well go and have these conversations and keep building. I mean, of course, my project is about doing that. But because I talked to Pajo, and you get struck by he's like, nope, it's over, nope, it's over, it's collapsing, it's the carnival or whatever. It's like, okay, maybe. It does look like that. I know, no one knows everything for sure. Even a great symbolic thinker knows and doesn't know anything for sure. Also, if you think about Heidegger as well, is of course people aren't aware of their possibilities. Possibilities stack upon possibilities too. That's what an entrepreneur does once something gets started. And even if it is true, all the things that we're doing, we should always be white-pilled, because that's the arc then. Then it's the bloody arc, because you need to sort of prepare it like the arc anyway, because you're going to come under attack by this thing. Everyone is. So even if it's still going to look like an arc, even if it's something that you think you can reinvigorate and, not take over the country, take us over, right? No, I don't mean it like that. But yeah, that's the point really that I'm making, is that even so, is that, and I think re-engaging with these things, what is all this desire to look into these things? What is all this? People are searching for their roots. People want their roots. People want the particularity. And I really, like I said earlier, I really think that's an important part of it. Our language is rooted in something. And the problem with English too is with Americans and the antipodes and Canadians is that, well, we post-national country. What? The language comes from somewhere. And it's a problem that all these internationals use English because they think it's become this international language. No, English is English. It's from England. So if you really want to understand it, it's looking into the roots, into the Anglo-Saxon roots of it. And you kind of get a bit of that with Heidegger, because the translators have done his similar work in German and how they've brought it into English words, see, being in time. So they've tried to use similar English words, right? And Heidegger breaks things down. So that's useful, because a lot of these Latin and Greek words that we have in our language, they're harder to understand because they're just representations, because we don't know how those Greek words break down to their bits and pieces. Whereas football is football. It's foot and ball, you know what I mean? In the sense how if you go to etymology. And so that's why Heidegger's work is so useful. But in an English sense, because a lot of those words, and you see your mind reprogramming itself when you read Being in Time. It's, yeah. And even using the old, I love the compounds he uses. Like being already, all the different compounds he uses. People say, it's very difficult. But is it? Okay. but it's getting it out of the Greek words that we don't have in our language, and you have this big compound. You say, yeah, okay, openness is what is disclosed. That would have been used different Greek terms, and which are because you don't have the roots. When you get these really simple compounds, it really, and we need to do more of that. I think that people need to look into the etymology of words a lot. Even you mentioned Jocko Willing and freedom. Look into the etymology of freedom. The word is English. The English sense of freedom is different from liberty. From, France is a romantic language, which means it's more based on rex. It's more about top down. Our freedom isn't do what you want either, and so their freedom is very ultimate as well. That's why French liberty was so got out of control in the revolution. That gave people a sense, in my view, that liberty idea of you do what you want. I think that's very kind of this ultimate Frenchness, and that kind of got into America a bit. Whereas the English freedom is more, you're free to be English. If you embody the procedures of the king, if you imitate and embody the pantheon of England, its enabling constraints allow you to be free. Doesn't mean you can do what you bloody want. It's within those constraints. My view is that these common law, American law, does not work if you are of these other cultures. They're just too far separating from it, And so people think that you can just bring all these other people with different procedures, different perspectives. They have a different sense of what these words are underneath. They have a different, right? And so if they think they can take that away and you can just keep the Westminster system on top of it. Oh, that'll function. No, it'll just collapse as soon as the majority of the people aren't properly assimilated into Englishness, let's say. That'll just collapse. That you need the thing underneath. You need that, because that's what it is. It's not, if you can just do what you want, people get on juries. If you have juries, right, in the jury system, and you're seeing this in America right now, if you have people on the jury system with a different sense of the cultural moral impulsion, like I said, there's a Moses in every cult. There's that if you have they suddenly go, I'm not going to prosecute this person who I know is guilty. And you see this in some of these cases in America, right? Because they're possessed by this proposition, or they're from a different culture. If they have different senses of right and wrong, they'll ignore your law, or they'll think differently of the terms. And that's ultimately back to your original question. Not question, because we're having a conversation, but your original dialogue when you're talking about what's underneath America. And that's what's underneath. And you know it exists because it's falling apart right now because less and less people are of it, less of this fundamental thing. And I think it needs to be grounded geographically. It needs to be grounded historically in terms of thinking about it, where you came from, understanding that pilgrimages. That's why people take pilgrimages. Or it will continue, or the system does not work without it. And if you doubt that, look at all these American cases where you have these juries where you've got one juror that just won't prosecute, because you need to have the same or similar sense of what these things ultimately are. It needs to be in your care. Anyway, that's my spiel on that.
You need something to bind you there. And I think I really appreciate Heidegger's, I really appreciate etymology and going back to the root of words, right? Like the word aletheia, right? It means unconcealedness, right? So it's a different way to look at the truth. The truth as a truth as correctness, right? You have a proposition, and does the experiment, you have a hypothesis, does the experiment match the hypothesis? And if it does, that's a truth event. That is a quality, a flavor of truth. But there's also truth that's disclosed, that's unconcealed, that's aletheia, that's something that was hidden is being revealed. And I think you keep going back to language, and I think that's right on, right? Heidegger said that language is the house of being. And he said that the problem is with philosophy and our language as such has become calcified and completely stifled. So he talks about going to another beginning, right? Is finding what was it that, inspired the pre-Socratics to think philosophically. Like we need to get back to that point, because that inspiration that inspired them to think philosophically was systematized into the kind of the propositional world that we have now. But language is where is the house of being, right? So we need to reinvigorate, our being through language, right? So I think etymology is extremely important, and I think it's we're definitely living through interesting times right now, and it's a good time to be alive. It just is. Like we're all gonna die, right? The apocalypse is fractal. Everybody has an apocalypse because everybody will eventually leave this world, not knowing if they'll ever see their loved ones again. Everything that they completed, all their projects, is gone. Everybody has an apocalypse. So it's, at one sense, like if the world is ending, my world's going to end anyways, right? So if I'm living at a transition point where there's a particular worldview is ending and another one is emerging, it's exciting to be alive, right? You better develop some psychotechnologies. You better look to the monks and the priests of how to pray and how to get right with the fundamental organizing principle, the logos, and then just hold on and surf. There's this the cliche quote: says, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf." Right? Learning how to surf is
And it's absolutely right. And also, I think too is that it's a good time to be alive. Yes, there's struggle in it and there's danger in it, but also it's a time. Churchill has this quote about is that we're lucky to be in the struggle that we're in during World War II, is because it gives us a duty to perform. It's part of our teleology. It's something that you can do, and that can apply to anyone. I always say this, is that it could be whatever it is. If you're engaging with your historical being, which is tradition, let's say, or a living tradition, it could be brewing of ales. It could be anything. It could be gardening, whatever it is. I think everyone has a destiny. I think that's when you're looking into your possibilities, like Heidegger talks about, is that if you're breaking down the they, if you can find the practices that do that, you can engage with what ultimately is unique to your possibilities that have come up from your past that you may not even be aware of. Yeah. It's
finding the uniqueness in your universality, finding the, I think that's right on. And I think we do have a destiny, and we do have, and we have more tools and more methods of psychotechnologies, whatever it may be, than ever before in the history of the world. The only thing we can develop discernment. You have to purify your heart, whatever that looks like in every language system that you're using, whatever religious system it is. You have to purify your heart. From the Orthodox perspective, it's you have to get the passions in check, right? And then in doing so, what is relevant to you starts showing up more brightly. That, things that are more relevant, things that are not relevant, that are reciprocally narrowing to your life, they start dying off, right? And then what is relevant and shines forth, right? And that's where your destiny is tied to. Your destiny is not some preordained role that you have. Your destiny is something that's pulling you forward from the future, right? It's like an attractor that is available always, but it's the veil, it's the addiction, it's the pride. Ultimately, going back to the Christian source, right? Pride is ultimately what puffs you up and keeps you from discerning the path forward. But there is a path forward. There is the truth. There is the logos, and it's constantly shining.
Nothing's been decided either, because this is what I love about Heidegger, is that getting underneath it all, is that all this, the correctness, the calculating correctness, that, this matches this and this matches this, that all began originally from that very first. It all comes from being originally, or B-E-Y-I-N-G, raw being. I call it raw being, which is sort of looking at being when you don't have, or maybe you can tell me what you think of this, like what B-E-Y-I-N-G, being, or being, raw being is seeing being, approaching being without any of your known, without any of your B-E-I-N-G, as in all the things that, because this is the thing that makes us think everything's been decided. This idea that, everything's known. Science has decided everything already, which is bullshit, because it's never been a theory of ultimate truth. It's been a best decided one, even if you believe that ultimately underneath it all. Because when you look deeply down, if you're a materialist, don't be so, you should be. Because if you look to the depth of quantum mechanics, they don't know anything. They don't know anything, right?
It's the abyss.
It's the abyss of, like, the observer having effects on things. But not even the woo theories, people go, there's a reason why the quantum scientists say, just trust the calculators, just ignore that down there, because that would undermine their authority, right? It's not all of them either, of course. And I'm talking about one interpretation of quantum Bayesianism. But I won't go into the detail of it, but just look into it. If you're a materialist, you look all the way down to the bottom and look at all the different interpretations of quantum mechanics, not even the woo ones. Look into it, and you get a sense of this is so undecided, that what all this leads to, the idea that it's deterministic and material is just, especially when and the conflict is large over that, what these interpretations are. I really think it's absolutely absurd when you look at the world that we have, that you would choose many worlds, that every quantum event is another split off, and there's an infinite amount of universes. Right?
Yeah, and that's and they make fun of people that have faith when that is your interpretation. I think at bottom, it's shown that there's no structure there. Like it's a category mistake, because we're searching for ultimate truth of what it means to be a human being, to be in relation with others. We're searching for that in particle physics. But what happens? We take that particle down. There's an atom. There's subatomic particles. All right, we're going to finally find these billiard balls. Oh, there's nothing there. There's energy, waves. There's fluctuations in a vacuum and whatnot. That's not a bad thing. Your gaze is oriented. You're mixing the category of ultimate truth and truth in a particular truth, and in doing so, you're going to be left with. It's like I made this analogy. It's like watching the movie Braveheart or whatever great movie it is, and it touches your heart, right? And you cry, and people that you're watching with the movie is crying with you, right? After the movie's done, you say, guys, I want to figure out what touched me in that movie. So what do? You break down the TV, you break to its components parts, right? You look at all the, the chips. You're not going to find why you started crying during that movie by looking at the physical properties that are in the screen. You're also not going to find what pulled you and what touched you in that movie by looking at the brain, looking areas that lit up in the brain and going down as deep as you can. The corpus callosum was lit up here. And so you're telling that the origin of that emotion that I felt is found in those lights in my brain, those neurons firing, or it's found in the television, the components firing. That's there and it's important, but that needs to be oriented in the hierarchy appropriately, because there's a lot more. And I look as Christianity is a social particle physics, like whatever particle physics is to the physical world. I think the ancient Christian ethic is to the social world. It tells you the components of how to develop a relationship with each other and through the world. And it can't be done just with us in our limited capacity. You have to invest. You have to have this organizing principle, this mystery to inform you, or it always leads to kind of the disintegration. But I think we should pick this up again. I got the kids are about to barge in here.
No.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
There's so much more to talk about, dude.
Yeah. Let's do it again.
And we only talked for the first time, right? And I want to delve deeply into, because I've read a lot of Heidegger, so I'd love to delve deeper into that, into Heraclitus as well, founding of being, and also how poetry works and his talk about the gods and how that all unfolds. Yeah, but I'll just finish it. Oh, sorry. I was just going to make.
I was going to say, like, the logos, right? Like, I did and if my kids barge in here, sorry about that.
Don't worry.
See, my dogs get a little excited here. Like the word logos, like we'll go back to this Greek etymology or going to the roots. I did a review of the first few verses, the 6 verses of John, the book of John. Have you seen it by chance?
I know the book of John, yeah.
So you just look at the first line. In the beginning was the word, right? From an English perspective, or from our language, from this perspective, in the beginning was the word. What do you mean? There was a single word, a couple syllables, letters stringed together, and that's what I'm supposed to be profoundly touched. Is that in the beginning was a word? What is it? A sound wave? Like, what do you mean? In Greek, it's inarchi tonologos, right? Inarchi means in the beginning, but archi means both space and time. Right. So it's in the beginning of time, but also at the arch, the head of the arch. So in the beginning of time and space was the word, the logos. So in the beginning of time and at the apex of space, we have the logos. What is the logos? It's not a word, right? It's the fundamental organizing principle of reality, and it's cosmic and it's mysterious, but it gives order to your world. It's the reason I can see you right now. It's the reason you can love your kids. It's the reason you can categorize the world that you see. It's the reason you can name the animals. It's the reason you have an identity that you care about. That's where I think the root is. And maybe next time we can pick up there with the logos in Heidegger, something like that.
Yeah, I think because drawing that out too is that it's the primordial logos behind it. It's the speaking gathering of the opening of first time, but because you're in your open. Oh, anyway, we probably shouldn't go into it. But there's a logos behind the logos that is the word. There's the thing that's first, which is the primordial seeing, but also, of course, the organizing principle. But that's people think word or what the word. It helps you understand phenomenology as well. Thinking about that, and that's where when you get deep into that, you think, oh, wow, it's beneath also all our knowledge. The openness came first. And so thinking that, we know so much about the world, really? Really, do we? But on that note, thanks, James. I didn't really get to introduce you, but I will say now that to James is a great, I think I would call you an emerging orthodox thinker. I think you're an emerging philosopher, I would call you. A great orthodox thinker that is growing, audience is growing. And it's been great to talk to you, man. And so he has a channel. It'll be in the description that you can check out. If it goes on his, I'm sure he'll put mine in the description as well. But we'll talk again, man. This is great. We'll have another conversation. But